Hello and welcome to the Undressing the Spirit podcast, where sex and spirit go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure into the psyche and beyond every conceivable limit. Welcome back to the Undressing the Spirit podcast. I am so excited about my guest today, Robert Cox. He's a therapist in the Kansas City area who specializes in trauma, addictions, and autism. He uses mindfulness as a way of teaching his clients to create an emotional space where they can choose their own course of action rather than simply reacting. His podcast, Mindful Recovery, is a resource for teaching these methods to individuals recovering from trauma and addictions. Robert is currently in the final stages of writing a book about the treatment of autism from a trauma perspective. I am so excited about that, Robert. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on, Tamara. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, definitely. So, our guests got to hear a little bit about your bio, but I'm just utterly fascinated by you and your story and how you ended up in the counseling field. So whatever you feel like sharing about how you got here would be so awesome.
I think it's a result of being broken myself. I mean, I think that's how most honestly, the best counselors, the ones that really end up here, have dealt with their own stuff and recognized those broken spaces inside themselves. Mm-hmm. And through that process of healing, I really found that I was connecting with other people's broken spaces, and I really liked that. And so, it started out with me after my own recovery from drug addiction, and I got lucky, at the young age of 24, my heart stopped, which is like not a common occurrence.
Oh, wow.
But it turns out you can only put so much stuff in your system before your body rebels. Yeah. And so that was a wake-up call for me. It was like, hey, do I really want to go out this way? I don't think so. And so that was the beginning of this whole, I had always been like a spiritual searcher in my life, right? But the pain of feeling like not enough, even for a divine creator, was a lot of what was forcing me into that use and that addiction. But out of that place, out of that healing place, I began to reach out and sponsor other people who were in recovery and really work with them. And, I had repeatedly people tell me, I was working in a cabinet shop as a wood carver and making my living that way for a while. And,
oh my goodness.
And someone said, you're the guy that everybody comes to. You ought to be a counselor, And of course, I am a lot like the biblical Jonah in that I resist any calling until I get swallowed up by a whale and then spit out somewhere, right?
So did you run in the exact opposite direction toward Tarshish?
It was more just this complete ignoring, pretending I didn't hear it, right? Mm-hmm. Until, life has a way of repeating lessons. And if you don't hear them the first time, they get louder and harsher. And so I just kept getting pushed in this direction. And the more I listened, the more I realized that when I was resisting that calling, things were not working out very well, or they're extremely difficult. But the minute I moved towards that calling, it didn't mean it was pain-free, but it got a lot easier,
Yes, because you were in alignment with it. That was
right.
Your soul's
and so
calling.
That was kind of how it happened over a period of years. I completed my bachelor's degree and started working in the field with developmental disabilities and continuing to work with my sponsor people in recovery and reach out through some work with people in maximum security prisons and, just built until, my bachelor's was done. And I was like, gosh, I just need to really pursue my master's and make this right. And I went into this whole, should I get the master's or should I just become a, addictions counselor? And I thought, well, the work level is really about the same. And if I have a master's, I don't have to limit myself to addictions counseling. And so I just decided to do all of it. And through that process, I found out that my real calling was trauma, that I understood trauma. And because I'd worked 20 some years in the field with autism, I started seeing how that was a trauma event too. And it just kind of built, like I said, there's this old Chinese saying that if you take one step towards the universe, it will take 10,000 steps towards you. And so when I
love that. Happy chills.
When I gave into that calling, everything fell in place. But giving into it really was a matter of embracing those vulnerable spaces that just really make you want to pee yourself most of the time,
Yes.
To be honest.
Thank you for being raw about that. No, absolutely.
I call them my big boy pants moments. It's time to put on my big boy pants and do this, right? Even though I don't know I can, even though I like going into grad school, we had no money. I had no idea how this was going to work out financially. I had no idea how I was going to handle 2 kids and a wife on disability because she has issues of her own, and being a primary breadwinner, I couldn't quit my job. So how am I going to do that? I didn't know. I walked forward in faith. That was my big boy pants moment, right? Just pull up the pants and keep walking and have the faith that it will work out. And it did.
There's an interesting dichotomy in that too, because I was a non-traditional student as well. I went back at age 28 with 2 daughters of my own. And I saw that sometimes there was a strength in that what some of the younger 20-somethings were going through, they did not necessarily have the same. There's a bit of a fire under your ass when you're the primary breadwinner and you need to get it done.
Quitting was not an option. That's
right, exactly.
My family is depending on this. Quitting is not an option. So it made it, you're right. At that younger age, this is maybe not the direction I want to go.
Right.
Works out okay, But, I chose this direction and I did it on faith and I really, really felt called to it. And I have a family that's depending on me to make a better income than I'm currently making. Quitting is not an option,
Amen. So tell me about this mindful recovery thing for you. Was it 12-step model at first?
For me, 12-step models don't work for everyone.
Yeah.
Often I think because, and here we get into the faith perspective, especially in Western cultures, I think that sometimes the Western 12-step groups take on a very distinctly Judeo-Christian foundation, which doesn't work for everyone, did not work for me. I will say that because of the things that I had gone through, the idea of God as father figure was not good for me at that time, right? My father and I have a great relationship now, but it was not that way at the time. And so I really had to find a spiritual base for myself within that 12-step program that worked for me. And
how'd you do that?
I went to Buddhism.
Excellent.
You see, even before I hit the drugs really heavily, and at the time that I was starting to dive into my addiction, I was exploring spirituality, and I got my minor in religious studies at a rock star.
Oh my God, me too.
Program, because for me, I was majoring at the time in physics and math, and astrophysics was my thing, and I was minoring in religious studies. Well, as I look back on it now, I see that really what I was looking for was the creator behind all of this.
Yes, so dovetailed. I mean, the entire universe is math, sacred geometry for the win. Yes.
And so it was all about this sense of where the hell does this come from and how do I fit in? Right. And because I had no sense of developed self or belonging. And so, then the addiction took over, and it turns out, just, FYI, if you're majoring in cocaine and methamphetamine, you're probably not going to do well in the physics and math. So, although I made really good scores in both.
I hear that.
So, but I had this religious studies minor, and so I knew already about Buddhism and some of the other world religions because I really immersed myself in them. And that was the one that fit for me. And so I began to practice as a part of my own recovery, the Chinese martial arts, and began to really focus on the meditation. And then I tripped across the life of a bodhisattva, this path that the Dalai Lama wrote a book about, right?
It's a great book.
And I decided that I was going to make that commitment in my life.
Wow. That
was going to be my direction, was this ideal of the bodhisattva, someone who had been able to come out the other side of suffering, and instead of just enjoying the freedom of not suffering, decided to delve into helping others escape that life of suffering. And so for me, that's what it was about. And I started down that path, and along the way, I began to drift back to my roots in Christianity. Because for me, the ideal of the bodhisattva is someone who can be free of suffering, but decides to take on the suffering of others. Well,
it's very Christ-like.
Right. For me, the greatest living example of that was Christ. And so that was where I turned in my own faith, went back. But I was for 15 years a practicing Buddhist, which is how I got deeply into the mindfulness practice and began to really learn.
Yes.
And then when I started my master's degree, actually a little before that, because I'm kind of a geek at heart and I like to research, I started digging around about why this actually works. Does it actually work? What's it doing to the brain? And the results were mind-blowing,
Yes.
that it actually restructures the brain. It's like going to the gym every day and building up your muscles, that you begin, these mind exercises begin to change the brain in some very physical ways. So for me, that was it. I was all in at that point.
Wow. I love how synchronous our paths are. We're definitely going to have coffee and more conversations about this, because I often joke with people that it took a Buddhist Catholic professor to teach me how to meditate, something pastors have been talking for years, from the pulpit,
Right.
but never explained how in the hell. I couldn't even sit through a half an hour prayer meeting, let alone,
Right.
sit on
And
a zazen mat. Yeah.
I can't remember where it was I read it, but I love the idea behind this. They said that eventually science will climb the mountain of wisdom and they'll be greeted by a laughing monk who's been sitting there for centuries.
Yeah, I saw that. You finally arrived.
Right. So, and I think that's where we're getting, is we're coming towards this unified theory of mind. And, we talk about, I'm CBT or I'm DBT or I'm psychodynamic, which is my own perspective, or I'm an EFT therapist, or I'm this or I'm that, or I think EMDR is the answer, and I think brain spotting is the answer. What we're coming to is this unified theory of mind.
Yes.
Where we're learning how to train the brain in a way that's going to heal the trauma and then move on from there.
Yeah, it's like pluralistic neuroscience.
Yeah.
We're all describing the same thing in different terms.
Right. It's kind of like that old story about, 3 different blind men feeling an elephant and trying to describe it. Yeah. Eventually the blinds will come off and we'll all realize we've been looking at the same thing.
So exciting. So when you're working with clients now, I'm fascinated because you are an interesting puzzle piece yourself in all of the different niches that you're in. Tell me more about how you use mindful recovery with trauma.
For me, it's about creating a safe kind of holding space, right? And that really, it's all about the trust relationship, man. I mean, if you're dealing with a client with a significant amount of trauma and they sense for a moment that you are not buying what they're selling, they're out the door, they're gone, right? So you really and you really have to build that trust relationship so that they believe that when it's uncomfortable, I can survive that. And I don't have to run right away. And mindfulness really helps with that. So in addition to doing things like helping you rewrite the negative inborn messages that you carry around, I want to worry about not playing whack-a-mole with those messages, because that's an unending game, right? What I want to worry about is the fact that I don't want to try and control my thoughts and emotions. I want to keep them from controlling me.
Yes, not getting caught up in that self-referential thinking.
And so when that's where we start. We start with the breathing and just learning that I can regulate my mind and my reactivity just by focusing on my body and my breathing. And once we've done that, we start to invite those negative thoughts in a little at a time and just without judgment begin to observe them, like old friends. Why are you here? What is it you have to teach me? What usefulness have you played in my life? And how have you caused me damage? And what lies were you based on? That kind of stuff.
Like Rumi's The Guest poem. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So,
come on in, have some tea.
Exactly. And so I love Rumi. That's like, he's like my favorite. You just spoke the magic word there. So,
I told you, we're going to have so many conversations, Robert. I've seen it.
That spiritual development side of me just latched onto him early. And Coleman Barks is one of the best translators of Rumi out there.
Yes. I celebrate the entire anthology. You're speaking my language.
Yeah. So, and to watch him just off the point, to watch him read it, to watch Coleman Barks perform the Rumi poetry is amazing.
I'm going to have to look that up. I don't think I've seen that.
I'm pretty sure that all you do when you go to heaven is eat cheese and drink wine and watch Coleman Barks read Rumi.
That's a good one. I'm down for that. Taco Tuesdays. It'll be Rumi.
Right.
Rumi for rumination. It'll be good. I mentioned before we even got on the show, I'm fascinated with male counselors and how the special, to me, offering that you can have for male clients. How do you get men who've gone through some serious shit to sit down and start to open up and have tea with their scary sides?
You know, it's really harder than it is with my female clients because we start from, especially in Western culture, from this perspective that to feel is weakness.
Right.
And if something is broke, I was just talking with a client this morning about this.
Perfect.
That, you're coming from a perspective of if something is broke, fix it. If you don't know how, get on YouTube and find out, right? That's what you do. You fix it.
Yes.
Well, some things aren't fixable, and he was talking to me about his wife. And, I see this a lot. I see men who are distant from wives because the wives explain how broken they're feeling. And the men immediately start to think, okay, how can I fix this for her? Out of a very loving place.
Sure.
But they don't want to be fixed. They just want someone to sit and hold that space with them.
Yes. See me, understand me, accept me,
and so,
love me.
It's the difference really between sympathy and empathy,
Yeah.
The difference between, okay, let's talk about how we can work this and how lucky you are in other ways. And that's sympathy, right? Empathy is, God, I really understand how that feels. And that sucks, but I'm here, right?
Yes.
The problem with I really understand how that feels is I have to be in a place where I really understand how that feels. And I haven't been running from my own emotions all my life.
Tough.
So it's very
male or female. That's tough. We humans do not like being uncomfortable.
It's very hard to be compassionate with other people and hit that empathic spot if I am completely out of tune with my own hurt places. And in that way, I think being a therapist is a gift because it has deepened that sense of me. Because when I sit in the room with a patient and they explain the ways they've been hurt, I think, wow, when did I feel that? How would that feel if I were in their place? And and I can reflect that to them. And then there's that connection, right, that starts.
Right.
Because there's nothing in the world like feeling felt, right? That's what they're looking for. It's what we're all looking for.
Exactly.
Getting there. And so as a therapist, what we have to do is we have to, before they even know that's what they need, we need to give them the experience of feeling felt, right? We don't want them to have to ask for it because that requires too much courage in that place. Hell, it requires too much courage of me sometimes.
Yes.
Right? Even with my own wife, even with our own spouses. It's very hard for us to sit and say, I just feel like this because we're afraid they're going to say something that's going to sound like our mother, sound like our father, or sound like, and it's going to trigger that space in me that's very reactive. And well, you're a lot of damn help, right? And then we're off to the races.
Yeah, I think it's harder with people that we're closer to. I actually find it easier as a therapist because I can compartmentalize.
Sure. Well, I think it's easier as a human being to risk with people that we have nothing emotionally invested in, because if you don't like me, I really don't give a rat's butt, right?
Right. Yes.
I don't care if you don't like me sitting at a green light for 20 seconds and wasting that time in your life. I'm just, I'm not that connected to you.
Preach. Yes.
Right? So someone I'm deeply connected with and I've invested a whole life in, wow, that's scary.
Yes. I heard a Buddhist monk talking about taking empathy further in the Western model and differentiating between that and compassion, because he said empathy for someone who's well trained like us as therapists is okay. We can get down in the shit with them, sit in the mess and get back out and we're all right. He said, but for a lot of people, they can't do that. And so compassion for him was a way of being able to lean over when someone's drowning and hand them the stick without getting in it.
Right. For me,
with them.
Compassion in that respect is about, I don't know all your broken places that would make you treat me that way. but I'm going to assume that they're there and give you a pass.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, a Walmart checkout person's a great example, right?
Yes.
Constantly having to deal with people's crap, you know?
Yes. Or the DMV.
Who cares if it's 25 cents less than it's marked? You know what I mean? It's
yes.
And you're having a conniption over it. Well, compassion is the ability to say, you know, I understand this isn't really about me. It's about you're having a really crappy day or a crappy life. And so I'm going to give you a pass. That's compassion.
I like it.
Empathy is feeling a little more deeply, I think.
No, I would agree. I was thinking about your core niches of addictions and trauma, and I suppose autism too. All of those are heavily inundated with, emotional reactivity at times. And I would imagine that for a lot of your clients, it can be very difficult for them to be empathetic for other people because they're so caught up in their own shit.
Well, that and, it's all about relationship too, in that all of those things have the same core, and that is trauma. Autism is a trauma event. The sensory environment attacks the individual and it becomes a very real, physically painful thing. And then you get into the social trauma in school where we define ourselves. And I find this with trauma victims too, because what happens is when we look at early trauma, like in the first 3 or 4 years of life, we notice the same kind of brain changes in an individual with just trauma that we see in an individual with autism, right? So it begins to change the brain in some of the same ways. And one of those things that happens is by the time I get to middle school, junior high, and high school, the way I define who I am in the world is by looking outward and seeing what is reflected, right?
Yes.
All of my peers become mirrors to me. Right? All of my peers reflect to me who I am or what my worth or value is. And even earlier than that, my parents are reflecting that in some way. And so
Absolutely.
So I can have autism and perfect parents, and I get into middle school and I'm not making the social connection because it's very hard for me to take perspective of other individuals for one reason or another. And so they just see me as weird. And whether or not they bully me, I become kind of socially excluded.
Right.
And so that whole Erik Erikson talks about the identity versus role confusion stage that hits there, right? And that never develops. I stay in role confusion because my mirrors aren't working for me. All they're telling me is bad stuff, and that's too painful.
I'm so glad you point out that it's traumatic no matter what, because I find in a lot of my clients, you can almost see exactly where they get frozen. And that stage of identity is stuck even in their 40s, 50s, and 60s.
And it's because all the mirrors that I had around me to reflect who I was, and in some cases in childhood trauma, those mirrors were my parents, right? I beat you because you're not enough. And no matter what you do, you can't ever become enough.
So painful.
So who the hell am I? And then I get into junior high and middle school, and I'm looking around and I'm already convinced I'm not going to see good things in these mirrors. And so I'll just exclude myself from that, right? Or I'll take on behaviors that will exclude me from that, right?
Yes, it becomes a self-fueling cycle.
Right. And so I never developed that identity. I become real confused. Now, if I don't know who I am in my core, how do I sell that to someone else when I get to the next stage of intimacy versus isolation? I don't.
Nope.
Right? I don't. If I don't believe that there's anything of value in me, I cannot sell that to someone else.
Yes. Then I see that on my couch with sexuality later on.
Right.
These couples trying to connect and have sex, and it's just not going well. And oftentimes that's the case. They don't even know themselves. How can you connect with someone else?
It's a really vulnerable space. Because when I ask you, if the answer is no, it's not just no because I really don't feel good or no because I feel ugly myself right now. It's automatically no because you see in me the same thing other people saw in me that makes me of no value.
Yeah.
Ties into all that stuff. And so the experience is, after a while, why keep going back to a dry well for water?
Right.
I would rather just stay at home and play Minecraft in the basement. Thank you very much.
You just described half of the population, I swear, right now.
Right. Well, I mean, that's it, though. I mean, frankly, I see social media as a potential for great things. I use it with clients to push them out into the world. Let's connect with people online and then meet up with them out in a safe space. And
sure.
But it can be quite the opposite. It can be this replacement for actual connection, right? And the problem with Facebook and online gaming is that there is no oxytocin involved there.
No, just a hell of a lot of dopamine.
Right. So my brain's not getting fed what it really needs. Right. And so I have no reason to socially relate. And just like the drugs begin to lower my brain's ability to feel pleasure and increase anxiety, that effect is increased when I get rid of the oxytocin in my brain. Right.
Yes.
So oxytocin is a huge anxiety fighter.
Yes. More hugs.
Exactly. That's kids hate it when I'm like, okay, you're stressed. Come get your oxytocin fix, right?
Yeah. So. It's fascinating side tidbit, because my area of specialty is mating behaviors research. There's actually been research to show that if a woman is hugged for 30 seconds or longer, it increases her likelihood to want to be penetrated.
Wow.
So I tell men,
so there's a tip,
you're
guys.
Craving. Yes. She won't even know what's going on.
Well, the trick to that tip is that same hug makes men more likely to want to bond with the female.
Right. So because whether you believe in creation or evolution, it's beautiful.
I was listening to, and I'm trying to remember his name, but he was the one that wrote the book called The Boy Who Was Raised Like a Dog.
Yes, I love that book.
Okay,
I recommend
there's
it
another
a lot.
One he's got out, and Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. There's another one he's got out that was called Born for Love, Why Empathy is Essential and Endangered. Now, one of the things he talks about in there is oxytocin, and the interesting thing he says that I thought was quite funny that I use now is it came about in us as a matter of survival from evolution. In that, mothers give birth, and they automatically, they look in the baby's eyes and now, oh my God, isn't he cute? And the oxytocin starts to flow. And that keeps us from realizing that really for the first year or so, he's just a screaming poop bag. And so we don't leave him in the woods that way. Right. So we're
I say it all the time to my kids.
Yeah. And so, but that's how powerful that chemical is, you know? So
it keeps society moving forward.
Yeah, it does. But it creates all these other problems in the midst, because we want that felt feeling. We want that connection. We want our brain to be fed in that way. And along the lines of your podcast with spirituality, the interesting thing to me is that when two people connect on that level, when I connect with a patient on that feeling fed level with them and they're getting it and I see they're getting it. And on some level, that really fulfills me because I know I'm performing my role correctly and it feels very good. And then a third presence shows up. And that's that divinity that is for me, right? Yes. I don't care what you call it. That's that divine space. The interesting thing to me is that when we look at the research, we find that during meditation or deep prayer, directed prayer, that divine place in the brain lights up, you know? The same way that it does when we're connecting with another person.
Absolutely.
And
I was just crying after a session the other day because it was just so fucking beautiful, that moment.
It is. It's amazing. It's this, and it's just, I don't want my sessions with patients to be about me being fed, right? That's not what it's about.
It's not.
Never what it's about.
But it's a beautiful circle of life, though, when we help our clients find their sacred purpose and we're fulfilling our sacred purpose, and then someone else holds that space for us, everyone gets fed.
To a large extent, in order to lead them a place to where they can understand how good connection can be, I have to connect with them on that level.
Right.
Because some of them are coming from places that are, I've known people who the only thing they could ever connect to in their life were animals because every person in their life brutalized them. And they had nowhere to go. Not one person they could say was ever kind to them, but they remembered the animals,
Yeah, to me, it's what evangelist, Peter Rollins. He's an Irish guy, totally progressive and fascinating to me.
I know who he is. I've listened to some of his sermons.
Love him. He loves turning Christianity on its head, and I just kind of love people that can do that. He talks about the divine as an event, and it's a very Buddhist concept. And to me, those are those moments when I'm connecting with the client, and we just have this like transcendence. We're both there in the room, but then we're also connecting on a more spiritual plane, and it's what biofeedback machines are actually being able to catch in real time. And that's exciting neuroscience for me to be able to explain to people. No, those vibes you're feeling, that's legit. Our heart rates are probably synced up right now because we're having a good conversation.
And the thing is that it was my volunteer work in a prison with maximum security guys that pushed me over the edge and made me decide I'm getting my master's degree. And it was because of those moments, because I could talk to these guys on a one-on-one level and say, I understand what it's like to be broken like you are, but there's hope and there's a way out of that. And I mean, sitting with guys who this was a 4-day program, and on day 1, they would come in and we had cookies and all kinds of things set out for them. And they didn't want any of it, because if you ask anybody for anything in their culture, you owe them, and that's not good, right? Yeah. And so seriously, I'd be like, hey man, can I get you some tea or some pop? Or nope, don't want anything, don't need anything. And by day 3, they're asking for hugs.
Oh my God, I love it.
All right. By day 3, I've got a guy sitting in front of me in tears and very sincere. And the thing is, this guy's never going to get out. He's not doing this because someday he's going to get out. If he looks remorseful, he'll get out. He's in there for life, no parole, no exceptions. You're done. What you did was horrible, right? And he's in tears saying, I don't know if there is forgiveness for me, you know? And that raw human connection was what I'm like, okay, I'm doing this the rest of my life.
You know? So good. Oh my God. Yes.
And that was the first time, I think, in my entire adult life, I felt that third presence really show up and just kind of whisper in my ear in that moment, this is exactly where you need to be.
Wow.
You know? So
I have chills. And that's exactly what I want every client to feel.
Yeah.
The same lit up moment. I was in a process group in grad school, and I had a supervisor. It was a parallel process group, so all of us counselors were in one as well. And she looked at me and she was like, Tamara, why are relationships so big to you? Because I'm always the counselor that's like, yes, when those moments happen. And I've been thinking about it ever since. And I struggled to answer her because to me, there was no answer. It is everything. The therapeutic relationship is everything. All relationships are. I'm an diehard existentialist. I just can't get away from it.
That's another thing we have in common, because my therapy dog of 15 years passed away last year. Big event. I adopted another little dog, and his name is Viktor Frankl. So
yes, that's my jam. Frankl and Fromm. Those are my freaking frag. Yes. So, what else is there if it's not
but I think
a relationship?
To answer your question about why is it that that we do this, I mean, and this may be an advantage you don't have, but having been a cocaine and methamphetamine addict, I can tell you that there is no drug out there that gives you the high that connected space gives you.
Oh, so good.
There is no drug out there that will feed you. And here's the wonderful thing. I used the drugs so I could numb out the painful spaces, right?
Right.
But I was numbing out everything, including the connected spaces.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I get fed in that way, I get this high that's much richer and fuller than that.
Right.
And I'm not afraid of the connected spaces anymore.
No.
You know,
you're willing to risk the vulnerability then.
I'm okay with vulnerability now. I don't seek it out. It kind of sucks at times.
Yes. Yes, it does.
But it's okay. You know, I know it's going to, I have now a fundamental belief that whatever comes, it's going to be okay.
Yes, we're going to have to do an entire spin-off podcast on vulnerability and entrepreneurs and counselors.
Yeah. That's big. Yeah. That's a big one. Boy, that'll tweak all
I find that huge. Even when you have a podcast, I have a podcast, and even when we're sharing on social media, just dealing with trolls and everyone's opinions, and even when you firmly believe in something, it's still hard, not going to lie.
And try writing a blog for Huffington Post that dares to say that maybe the person that wants to lead us is a sociopath,
Ooh, Robert.
Find out the trolls you get then,
Yes, we definitely need to do one of those podcasts. So, thank you so much, Robert. I could talk for another 3 hours, and I don't say that lightly.
It was fun, yeah.
Such an honor, truly. Tell people where they can find you.
My website is liferecoveryconsulting.com or .org, either one. And you can find pretty much everything from there.
Awesome.
My book landing page. So if you sign up for the book on autism, the first 50 get half off of the purchase. And then I hope it'll be out in February. That's what I'm shooting for. I'm about probably a third of the way done at this point. So
needed. You definitely, I'm going to add my hat into everybody else saying that you definitely have a unique perspective on it. And this existentialist fully gets it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will definitely be recommending it.
Is it about sensory issues and how they create angst? Yeah.
And from someone who's got misophonia, it's a legit thing. I get it. If that's even a sliver of what someone with autism goes through.
Right.
I would definitely want resources like yours. It's so practical and tangible then. Robert, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All I can say.
I enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Undressing the Spirit podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and titillation today. As always, I am forever grateful for 5-star reviews, comments, and subscriptions on iTunes and anywhere else you may be listening to this broadcast. Please note the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until next time, everyone.